Welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations, your authority in navigating the world of homeschooling diverse learners. Featuring Peggy Ployhar from SPED Homeschool, Annie Yorty from AnnieYorty.com, Leilani Melendez from Living with Eve, Stephanie Buckwalter from eLARP Learning, and Dawn Jackson from Dawn Jackson Educational Consulting and Tutoring. With over 75 years of combined homeschooling expertise, experiences, and perspectives, this group is eager to share their wealth of wisdom to empower your homeschooling journey. So grab your favorite mug, settle in, and get ready for insightful discussions, valuable insights, and practical tips. Give your homeschool the power boost it needs to successfully educate the unique learners in your home.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Today, we are going to talk about screen-savvy parenting, navigating tech with biblical boundaries. And today, my guest is David Tucker. David is an author, speaker, husband, and father of three who resides in Cleveland, Tennessee. Throughout his career, David has served as both a pastor and technology executive. The intersection of his faith and his passion to see families wisely use technology led to his founding digitalparenting.com and writing the Digital Parenting Guidebook. Welcome, David, to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And we were talking ahead of time, just how pertinent this topic is, especially when we have kids sometimes that get a little screen addicted, or it's their calming device, and or maybe even a communication device. And so that leads us to tricky places as parents who have kids with various learning struggles, communication struggles. And so I really feel that this is a must listen to conversation that we have ahead. And so I'm excited to have David on and bringing his expertise, especially from a biblical perspective. A lot of people, maybe you know or don't know, our organization has a Christian founding principles in it. It doesn't mean that if you're not Christian, don't listen to us. We want to encourage you in all your areas of parenting and homeschooling, and you'll get our background with that, but that doesn't mean that what we talk about is not pertinent to every family. So David, I always ask my guests when we first start out the conversation, just to tell them why, to share with our audience why you're just so passionate about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So because of kind of this dual background that I've had, so as you mentioned in the intro there, I've had a chance to actually be on staff at a local church, as in a pastor role. I've had a chance to also be out in the tech world. And so even though now I'm not on staff at a local church, I still volunteer at my church and still very active. And one of the things that started happening was families would come to me if they were having problems with technology. I kind of became the go-to guy to help them address some of those challenges. And that came after I gave a talk, gosh, it's probably been 8 years ago now, at the church that I'm at, to really just explain, hey, here's some of the dangers that you need to be on the lookout for. And while I was sharing these dangers, I'll be honest, 8 years ago, I thought those dangers happened in other places with other families, not the ones that were in my church. But over that next year, I learned that pretty much every single danger I was talking about was happening to a family in our church. And so through that, I began to see that these problems were more widespread than what I thought. And then with my background in technology, I started to see that the problems were going to get worse with some new technologies that were being introduced, with some new capabilities, with kids getting devices at younger and younger ages, that it was going to be really hard. And even with my own kids, I remember thinking about how this was going to make certain aspects of their life more difficult. Not to say that there aren't things that are going to make their lives better in other ways too with technology, but it really just became something that I was passionate about, to help give parents tools so they can wisely approach technology use in their homes.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's a lot of stuff we definitely don't talk about, but when you start like sharing things that are going on, in confidence with other believers and friends, it's amazing. They're like, oh, you too, you're struggling with this as well. And it is a topic, these things we need to be talking about because they are happening. They are happening within the church. They are happening in places we don't think that they should be happening. Like we're in this protective community. But we live in a society now that's so interconnected that there is just no getting away unless you live in a zone where you have no connectivity at all.
Right.
There's very few spots that even exist anymore like that. My husband usually finds those when we go camping, though.
Exactly. Yes.
so so yes, that's awesome. So talk to us just a little bit about the work that you do then at digitalparenting.com.
Yeah, absolutely. So at digitalparenting.com, we really want to see there be a generation of youth come out of the church that are free from the burdens that come from the misuse of technology. And so we want to do that by really equipping two different groups. Obviously, parents are the number one group. It's in our name.
Yeah.
We're really excited about helping parents. However, here's the one challenge that we see in terms of helping parents. A lot of times they don't know there's a problem until it's become a big problem. And we want to actually help families avoid some of these problems that come from the misuse of technology. And so one of the ways that we do that is by also partnering with churches, because churches, let me just tell you, if you don't know this, they're very aware that these problems exist because they've had a lot of families affected by the misuse of technology. And so being able to give them resources that they can hand to the families in their ministry so that they can say, listen, if you get in on this early, you're going to prevent issues down the road. Or if you're already struggling with it, here's kind of a map that you can follow with how you can really begin to approach this intentionally as a family.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. It is so much preparation
Yes.
versus, when we know the issue's happening or, there's some fallout that then it goes, into other arenas. I mean, you can lock down technology, but it doesn't take care of the problem and all of the
Right.
the back part that you have to deal with mental health wise, and more. So that's
Absolutely. And we're learning, and I know we'll talk about some of that stuff later, but we're learning more and more about those side effects. We've got more data than ever. And so my hope is that as we talk about some of that today, parents are going to understand that there is some urgency here to make sure that we're approaching this in a way that's healthy for our families.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're watching live, and I see that we have some viewers on, just know that if you're struggling with technology with your student, pop some questions into the comments. Let us know what's on your mind. We'd love to be able to have David address those as we're live, and you can definitely do that anonymously if you would prefer. And just let us know what we can do to help you. That's why we go live, because we know that sometimes you aren't able to access people speaking at different venues or in other ways. Your life is just busy, but hey, this is conversation happening now. I have a question. So definitely let us know how we can help. But yes. So I guess the first question, good to start out with, how can parents use their faith to help guide their kids in making responsible decisions about using technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the challenges that I had early on in talking about this topic was I could do a really good job of getting parents scared about the dangers of technology that were out there, but I couldn't do a good job of telling them what to do. And so that's one of the things that we've worked on at digitalparenting.com. And part of the reason I founded digitalparenting.com was because I wanted to give parents that resource. And one of the things we see, and again, I believe that if you're listening to this and you're not a Christian, you can still absolutely get benefit from the 7 essential steps of digital parenting that we cover in the book. But really, a lot of that foundation does go back to the Bible, because we help parents have conversations with their children about the reality of what they'll face when they're online. That's a big part of what
Yeah.
we do. So one of the things we always tell parents is there's nothing wrong with great tools or great devices that help us monitor. Those things, those are all good if they're existing within an overall approach. But at the core of this, we need to be discipling our children. We need to help them know the temptations that they'll face. We need to help them know what the healthy choices are in those moments. And we do that through having both Bible studies and discussion guides that go along with our 7 essential steps of digital parenting, so that parents can sit down and prepare their kids for some of the decisions that they're going to have to make. But the great thing is, before they actually have to make them, which is one of the reasons we always talk to parents about starting early.
Yeah. And, you think you have so much control over your kids. I have 3 adult children. I know I don't have any control over my kids. That it just becomes evident as they get older. um, and so they do. They are the one making the choice. You can influence that so much with just different things that you do, conversations that you have, like David's talking about. But at some point they will make that determining decision.
Right.
And so preparing them for that and knowing that those decisions will be in front of them is so important, because you just it will pop out in some place, in somewhere, sometime that you are least expecting it. And you need to be proactive about that. So, yeah, I think, a lot of parents ask, what about screen time? What's healthy? What's not? Is there, a cut and dried rule? How do you go about figuring that out?
Yeah, absolutely. We include recommendations in the book, but I'm going to talk about it even at a more basic level before we get into this, because I want parents to understand what's at stake here. Because I think at times
Yeah.
we look at this and it's more of a, well, yeah, a lot of screen time is bad. We're working on it, and just have that
Hmm.
kind of approach, which really doesn't have any urgency. What I want parents to understand is that we do have a lot more data than we've ever had before.
Hmm.
And we can even see, if we look, and this comes from an article in JAMA Pediatrics from September of 2023, we can see here that increased screen time in early childhood, so again, we're talking at 1-year-old here, is
Hmm.
negatively associated with poor performance on developmental screeners by the times they get to ages 2 and 3. So one of the
Wow.
things we can see is that there is this connection that exists between the screen time and our children's brain, and to be honest,
Hmm.
our brains too. And so one of the things we can see here is that if we're really going outside of these bounds, especially as our children are developing, that there's a consequence. We can see
Yeah.
consequences in terms of some of the data around potentially connections with ADHD, for example, with excessive screen time. Not saying that's every situation of ADHD, but there are cases. The Cleveland Clinic's been doing some great research on that.
Hmm.
And in addition, we can see that it's also changing the way that our kids can focus. And so, especially if you're listening to this and you're a Christian parent, here's what I want you to understand. Screen time is a spiritual issue. Here's why I say that. If we think
Hmm.
about how our children will be able to, encounter the Bible and pray and commune with God, it's through times that require focus. And if we're giving our
Yes.
children, by giving them excess screen time too early, if we're giving them that, partly what they're losing is the ability to have some of that focus for an extended period of time. So it does definitely become a spiritual issue. The other thing I'll mention
Yeah.
here, this is just kind of a thing that as we talk with parents, we realize that a lot of parents aren't thinking about. And that is, when we look at data around screen time, it's actually talking about all screen time. Sometimes there's maybe
Hmm.
categories of screen time that we kind of push under the rug, like, oh, they're doing that for school, so we're not going to consider that time with the rest of the time, right?
Right.
And you might say, well, hey, my kid's doing this online program, as a part of our homeschooling efforts. I totally
Hmm.
understood. I mean, we homeschool all
Right.
3 of our kids here as well. Here's what you do with that, though, and that's why we give 2 different numbers in the book. I won't go into all the
Hmm.
details, but we give parents a framework for helping to evaluate that. It's just, you need to understand that if your kid's spending 5 hours a day potentially in front of a screen by doing schoolwork, then we need to balance that out by providing some times that are completely screen time free once school's
Hmm.
over. And by
Yeah.
helping to think through the activities, giving our kids, also giving them ideas and options for how they can spend that time, we're going to be
Hmm.
combating some of those side effects that come with having too much screen time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned those things, because, yeah, a lot of I think we disassociate learning with in that screen time, but also in other ways. I've had parents even approach and say, "Well, my child goes to ABA therapy for 7 hours. Then how do we get in school?" And I'm like, 7 hours is school,
Right.
And so it's a change in perspective, because there we have to lump it all into kind of that same category, but you then filter it through, just how much concentration are they,
Right.
adding, and other things, and what's needed outside of that. Um, but yeah, lots of good points there. I see so many kids in my studio, because I coach, and so I've just seen the lack of, like, cross body movement in kids because they're so stuck in front of devices and other things, and getting them out to be able to play and to use, like, one hand and the opposite leg. I mean, some kids can't even do it. And so, yeah, technology has played a huge role in that. And it's hard because as parents, we're kind of strapped for time and for a lot of other things, and technology is kind of an easy way to say, oh, just watch this while I'm doing that. And I'm guilty as a parent too. We didn't have that data back when my kids were young.
Right. Well, and this is one of the things too. I know it might sound like, oh, this is a hard thing to implement. One of the things I want everyone listening to understand is, I'm calling for everyone to have empathy one for another here on this. We're not coming at this from a judgmental perspective. Even when I've had previous generations that are talking to me about, oh, parents these days, they just hand their kids a device. And one of the things I would say is, I think that generation would have too. Every parent in that situation,
Exactly.
right? Just given the reality of how life is, it becomes a big temptation. However, what I would like to see parents do is to come alongside and encourage each other in this area. One of the things, though, that I was really surprised about early on was when we were talking with families and they were implementing some of our recommendations, they certainly got some pushback from their kids, but they also got a ton of pushback from other parents. And so I kind of want to just flip the script on that, and let's talk about how we can encourage one another here in these areas where we're working to make great decisions with our kids about how they use technology.
Absolutely. Yes. Because there's so many good uses for it
Absolutely.
too. And we've seen so much of a shift since COVID happened for education happening online, which is amazing because you can access educators now worldwide.
Yeah.
And so there's so many positives that we can't just, focus on the negative, and definitely, it's becoming a necessary thing. But as it's becoming a necessary thing, it gives us unique challenges because there's people realizing our kids are online, like
Yes.
online predators, cyberbullying, and other harmful content. And so, how can parents establish safeguards while encouraging open communication with their kids?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we look at the 7 essential steps of digital parenting, and when we actually get into steps 4 and 5. So step 4 is all about, again, protecting our kids from predators. Step 5 is all about respecting themselves and respecting others, about online behavior. And let's talk about step 4. Let's talk about predators for a minute, because I think a lot of parents, this is where when they're going through our course, they can kind of get a little bit overwhelmed. Because in reality, we need to prepare our children for what they might encounter here. And so that's one of the reasons we heavily rely on discussion guides, which are free resources that come with the book. They're available online, but they help you help talk through with your child some things they might encounter. So imagine, let's just take two different scenarios here. Imagine that your child gets some sort of a communication device, and we'll talk more about those kinds of decisions later, but imagine they have a phone, for example, and they have an authority figure. That can be a teacher at church, maybe. It could be a pastor at church, could be maybe a coach. Or if someone sends them something inappropriate, if you haven't given a framework for what they're supposed to do with that, they're having to just figure that out on their own in real time.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
What we can do, one of the greatest things we can do here for our kids is giving them red flags that they can spot and telling them exactly how you can help them in those moments. So you can say, hey, if you get this, you need to come to me right away, right? And this could be something that might seem innocuous, right? We've heard examples of, oh, this authority figure asked for a picture of me in my bathing suit at our beach vacation, right? If you teach your kid early that, hey, that's a red flag, you need to come to me with that, then all of a sudden it's not going any further. You're able to step in and provide a level of protection because they're not having to figure it out themselves. The other thing with this is we need to, again, teach our kids to kind of, again, be on the lookout for those things, but we also can help them by putting common sense boundaries in place. There are very few people, pretty much at this point, there's only a couple of people, and they're actually all family, that are other adults that have the ability to have direct conversations with my kids, for example. Now, there are communication channels that, the youth leaders at our church, that other families that we have, there's a lot of lines of communication that can actually reach my children, but that I can monitor. But there's very few people that have that unmonitored level. And so as parents, we just need to be familiar with what those channels are and how we can provide a level of safeguard for our kids in those moments.
Absolutely. Yes, that's great advice, because there's so few conversations that they really need to have.
Right.
And I know a lot of kids that come to my studio, they're like, "What's your Wi-Fi password?" I'm like, "Well, if your parents haven't given you the ability to have internet on your phone, it's not coming through me."
Right. Exactly.
And that's, it's just, you got to respect the parent and the decisions that they're trying to hold for their kids. And they're doing it for a reason, and there is so much, you can set and things like that, but also just having those, I love that about that pre-conversation about, when things are going to come in, how to have those conversations, and them not having the stress of dealing with it, because a lot of times they'll put that back on themselves. What did I do
Right.
to bring this about, when really they did nothing? It was, on their end, they're innocent, but there's somebody else that's trying to take advantage of them.
And if
And
you as a parent, like if you have any questions on how some of this could play out, right, you can
Mhm.
go in and look. There's several different videos that are available on YouTube and different organizations and different parents have done this, where they've pretended to be, just for example, let's say a 12-year-old girl jumping on Instagram, right, who you actually have to
Mhm.
pretend to be 13 to get on Instagram. But either way, like
Okay.
when they get on that platform,
Mhm.
and the amount of time it takes before there's some adult who's coming in and showing
Mm.
predatory behavior, and it happens within an hour, and then it just continues, and unfortunately in a lot of
Wow.
different areas. So you need to understand, like, yeah, the decisions about, like, do I give my kid access to, whatever it is, right? You need to
Mhm.
understand the realities of what they're going to face, because the
Right.
truth is most of us would look at, and again, I'm just going to take an example here. Like, let's say you just have some dangerous weapon and you leave it on the coffee table in your living room. Most other parents would
Mhm.
walk and say, "Oh my gosh, that's so dangerous." Your child is about 100 times more likely to be damaged by the phone that they have in their hand than by that dangerous weapon. The problem
Absolutely.
is that we don't correlate that, because we think of it in a certain way. And
Hmm.
part of our job here, we're not doing this purposefully to scare parents, but we do want to drive urgency of helping them understand the dangers that do exist. So giving your kid the decision to get on social media, that has consequences. Now, it could be
Mhm.
that at a certain age you believe it's appropriate for them and you're going to equip them and guide them, but we should never just hand them a device or hand them access to something and basically say, let you figure out what you want to do with it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like taking the old fashioned, I just remember growing up and my mom saying, "Okay, when you turn this age, you can get your ears pierced."
Right. Yes.
That kind of ends at that, well, if you have an infection, it's your own fault. But it's not like you're opening this Pandora's box
Right.
at that age and saying, "Well, whatever you want to do." I mean, I guess
Right.
some parenting that might happen, but very few
Right.
parents would make that choice for their child. Um, and so, yeah, seeing it from that point of view, it's a completely different thing. So, but the problem for us parents is that technology is always changing.
Yes.
And how can we prepare our kids for a future where we don't even know what we're preparing for, or what could come at them, and still maintain our biblical values
Yeah.
in our home, especially, but also to encourage them as they're going outside our home to continue that.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, again, this is really a discipleship conversation rather than a monitoring and control, kind of situation. We're really trying to
Hmm.
teach our kids not only what we believe the right decision to make in a given moment is, but we're also trying to explain to them why, right?
Right.
And I've had parents that say, "Oh my gosh, they're giving me so much pushback about implementing these changes." And then those parents have actually sat down and given some of the data and told some of the stories that came out of the
Mm-hmm.
book. And their kids are all of a sudden like, oh, I didn't realize that that risk was there.
Yeah.
And in those moments, you're equipping your child to also see this particular risk for what it is. And so
Mm-hmm.
by sharing that kind of information, not just making it an I told you so or you have to do it this way because I said so kind of moment, but it's
Yeah.
truly I'm shaping this for you so that when you're out on your own, when you leave the home at whatever age that is, you have the tools that you need to make the right decision. Because at some point, again, our kids are going to be out in the world, and
Mm-hmm.
we were talking about this before the show started. There's really no scenario these days, unless they choose to go live in a Mennonite or Amish community, where they're going to go to
Yeah.
a place that's totally technology free. And so we
Yeah.
do need to equip our kids for that. I believe that's a part of our calling to do, to raise our kids for the culture that they're going to be living in. But the
Right.
other thing I would add to this, based on your question, is we also need to teach our kids that it's okay to wait and maybe not be the first one on a new platform or the first one to have a new device or the first one to go out and be getting whatever game
Right.
it is, those kinds of things, and teaching them that it's good sometimes to step back and say, does this ultimately help me or does this hurt me? And if
Hmm.
we can teach our kids early on to start thinking through that, then they're going
Right.
to be better equipped when they get out on their own to say, you know what, I could sit down, in college and binge watch a whole show on, whatever streaming service it is. But, is that going to be the healthiest thing for me? Is it going to enable me to get my work done? Is it going to prevent me from reading my Bible? And by giving them those
Right.
decisions early, they're going to be able to have those decisions with themselves in the future.
Yeah, exactly, because they will be having those decisions either with themselves, with God, or with somebody else. And who is that somebody else? And what are the prominent voices in their head? Those are lots of things to think about. If you've had a lot of discussions around this, those will be the predominant voices that they'll be hearing. It won't be the, oh yeah, my parents said something about that, and then I dismissed them, and then I've got all this other, come back from my friends that are saying all of this. That's the predominant voice then. And so yes, you definitely have to keep the conversation not just once or twice, but it has to be an ongoing, within your family. And I have been very happy that all my kids hate social media.
Yes.
And they're always like, Mom, can you look this up on Facebook? Because don't have access.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Mom's there. So yes. And we had to talk about that ahead of time. It's like, there you just it it's something you have to prayerfully take into consideration, even as an adult. How much do
Absolutely.
I use? And it does become, we are setting that example.
Hmm.
And how are we handling it? Do you have any other advice for parents as they're just even considering their own technology use and
Yeah.
what they may be portraying versus what they're saying?
Yeah, 100%. So when we start off with step one in the 7 essential steps of digital parenting, it's all about regulating screen time. And part of the reason we do that is because every danger that your kids will experience online gets worse with more screen time because there's more
Mm-hmm.
opportunities in there.
Right.
So we have families create what's called a family screen time plan. That happens as a part of step one. And the interesting thing is that there's two halves to that plan. The first half, your kids will never see. It's for you to look at your own behavior, and if your parents have got a spouse, it's for you and your spouse to sit down together
Mm-hmm.
and talk about your own digital habits, talk about things that you might need to start, stop, continue, or change, and
Mm-hmm.
really walk through that and define, hey, what are the times that devices are going to not be seen in our home, right? What are the things we're going to do
Mm.
together that devices aren't there for? And when you have that conversation, then you can move over and start talking about the second half of the plan, which is really talking about those screen time limits for your children, where they are and are not
Mm.
allowed to use devices, and a lot of other questions that we'll walk you through. But one of the things we know
Yeah.
is that your kids are going to develop a lot of the habits they see in you, irrespective of
Yeah.
what you say. And so we want
Mm-hmm.
to equip parents to wisely use devices. And trust me, there's been times, like I'm thinking back to last week. Again, I'm helping run digitalparenting.com, obviously, and we had a couple things come up at the last minute. And so I'm sitting there at dinner trying to send a message back to one of the people that works at digitalparenting.com on Slack. And then it hit me like, oh gosh, I don't want to be passing this behavior on to my kids. And so, make an effort to stop and put the device away and those kinds of things. But I have the same temptations that you all face. And I know there's a lot of jobs and a lot of other events or organizations that you can be a part of that really want to grab at your time through your phone or through other devices. And so it just is a conscious, purposeful decision to say, I'm going to model what my kids need to develop. And I'm also really conscious of that too, because my kids are learning to drive right now. So in November, I have twin boys that are going
yes.
to be behind
that's
the
so
wheel.
scary when you see people on their phones driving.
Absolutely. And so it's just, it's been a focus in my mind to just, try to keep that phone as far away from, being involved in the driving process, because I never want them to think that that's okay. So these are all areas where we can really give our kids an example that they can follow.
Yeah. And I have learned too in that process because, with running two different companies, my phone is always going off. And I've just learned to tell people that, they're like, why can't I get a hold of you? Well, this is why. This is why my phone is not there. And then they start to respect that time. But if you leave that door open, people will step all over you. And so you have to set the boundaries, but people will respect that once they realize your reasoning behind it, or even if they don't, they just know that it's not worth trying to contact her then. And they'll fit in the spaces that you have available. And I think we forget that because technology has made us so available all the time.
Yes.
And it's not only ruining our just family lives, it's ruining our spiritual lives, it's ruining our lives in general, because we're not getting the rest we need and just the downtime that we need as well. And like you said, it's setting our kids up to do the exact same thing, because they're going to copy us.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So, there is that age when kids become teenagers and mom and dad know nothing. How do you navigate that as a parent when still you have set boundaries, but you want to give your kids some more freedom. Do you have any wisdom or advice?
Yeah. Here's one of the things that I would just say up front is, every situation is different, and every child is different. And again, we started off with twin boys. I also have a daughter, and I can even tell you that my twin boys are very different in terms of, how they approach different things. And so this is a decision that as a parent, again, you'll have to make. But one of the things I think that's so critical to understand here is, if you say, okay, I want my child to, be able to effectively use technology in a responsible way, that means at some point you're going to introduce them to different things, whether it's having a device, being on different platforms. The thing I would want to remind parents here is it's not equal to do it at 12 versus 17. Okay. There are some things that we know are extremely dangerous as we continue to get more data in. And so in areas where we have data and we know that things are dangerous, this is where I would advise you as a parent. It's ultimately your decision, but I would advise you to continue to wait and delay, even if your child is going to end up being radically kind of countercultural to the rest of the people in their grade that they have interactions with. So the biggest example of this that I can talk about is social media, specifically for girls that are preteens and early teens. We have so much data that's coming out on the negative effects of social media on this age group, enough so that we're not just saying this is correlated. There's a lot of areas where we can actually go in and say social media is actually causing this.
Wow.
When we look at that 10 to 14 age range, the increase in having a major depressive episode, when we look at the increase of actually having to be checked into the hospital for some aspect of self-harm, we're seeing in some cases this increase by 189% when we look at the pre-2010 time period. And that was really when we started to see phones placed in the hands of everyone in middle school and high school. And so when we look at this and I hear parents say, well, I think my kid is, she's mature enough to be on Instagram and all of her friends are. What I want to explain to you is going back to that thing we said about the dangerous weapon and the risks here. We need to understand what we're potentially risking in this. And that could be the mental health, of your daughter, of my daughter. And so in those moments, we need to make decisions based on that. Now, I did mention that every situation is different. If your child is already having struggles with anxiety or depression, then your response might be different. If you're seeing
Right.
someone for professional help in those areas, I would invite them to be able to speak into some of those decisions
Mm-hmm.
that you're making for your child. I have seen, for example, another area where I would say to include other professional opinions. If you do have a child that potentially has different types of disabilities, this can be another good opportunity, because I have seen some where an online community is something that's extremely beneficial for
Right.
some.
Exactly.
And so that's an area where, again, you're going to have to look at each situation differently and determine what the answer
Hmm.
is. But here's one of the things I would encourage parents to say is, sometimes the answer isn't just yes or no. Wait is a very valid answer to your children in many of these circumstances, especially when it comes to social media. And even the Surgeon General of the United States has come out and said that 13 is too early for social media, that parents
Hmm.
would benefit from waiting until 16 or later to give their kids social media. And we're
Yeah.
starting to see this push through. There's laws. We've had laws now in Utah. We're seeing laws being discussed in Australia and a lot of other areas that would potentially ban kids from getting on specific apps before certain ages. So we will eventually see some of the laws catch up to the dangers that exist, but technology is always going to move faster than those laws. And so as a parent, just getting yourself updated on what the data says and making a wise
Mm-hmm.
decision is going to be now an essential part of all of our jobs as parents in 2024.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's so true. And it's astounding, just the information that's, coming in. And I think my husband and I had some conversations, if we'd only known,
Right.
and a lot of it was, just related to video games. And yet, here, my oldest made it through college writing because of video games,
Right.
because it helps him to focus. And, as a parent, again, it's an individual basis, and you do have to have those conversations, because I was getting so upset with this child about his screen time, and in the end, he's like, "Mom, my brain just can't, I can't think until I have just a little bit of quiet time, and that's what that does for me." And I'm like, "Okay, so as long as you're getting good grades, let's do a trial basis," and so yeah, you just don't even know how that'll affect them positively or negatively. And so yes, having the conversation is where you start, and the relationship, and having a good relationship where that comes from. It isn't just a top down, we're
Right.
forcing this upon you.
And another part of that, when we talk again about discussions, so we have a discussion guide to go through with your children when it comes to social media at whatever point you bring them on, because we know that there's a lot of emotions that can get tied to using social
Mm,
media. And this is another area where we can help prepare our kids, because,
yeah.
imagine the first time you ever saw someone else on social media and you were jealous of something, or the first time you saw somebody and, or
Mm,
somebody give an opinion you didn't agree with and it made you angry. Helping your kids
right.
understand that these emotions can just happen when you're using
Yeah.
social media, so that they know how to
Mm,
spot that and go, oh, this is not a healthy interaction for me. I'm being jealous of something this other person has. I'm looking at
right.
the highlights of their life and it's making me feel worse about my own life. But
Mm,
I know that they're not sharing everything. If you can talk your child through those things so they can spot those
hmm.
emotions ahead of time, they're going to be far ahead, to be honest, of most
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
teenager that's on social media. And this is just it's going to be an essential tool. So we also have parents book kind of these recurring conversations with their kids about, hey, what feelings did you have when you were going through social media? You don't have to sit there and
Hmm.
quiz them on every single thing they looked at, but you can help them have a point of discussion so they can better understand some of the feelings and emotions that are coming in when they're interacting online.
Mhm. Yeah, that'd be a great dinner conversation, like what came up today that, had red flags for you? How did you respond to it? And that just teaches other kids at the table as well,
Yes.
helps you be part of the conversation. That's our family. We just, that was our decompression time, was around the dinner table. And I know a lot of people don't have family dinners anymore. I really do encourage it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you get a lot done in a half an hour meal or more. So sometimes they sit longer, and you appreciate that. So,
Absolutely.
um, yeah, for sure. So, um, so what, as far as advice, for parents listening and, watching, would you give as like some first steps, if they feel like I'm convicted, I definitely need to be doing something different. How do you even start evaluating, um, just where we're at
Yeah.
and, the changes that need to happen? I think it can be very overwhelming because you're like, oh my goodness, I see a lot of red flags, and now I'm feeling guilty. And like we said
Yep.
before, don't do that. Um, but but yet, we're convicted, and when you're convicted, you just feel like, okay, I need to repent,
Right.
not only to God but to my children, and where do I start?
Yeah, first of all, I would tell parents, take a deep breath, okay?
Hmm.
It's you can know that you're called to be a parent in 2024. And I
Yeah.
firmly believe God's going to provide you what you need to do that. And I also would say don't try to solve this problem in a day or a week.
Hmm.
Start with yourself as a parent, look at your own habits, whether you use our resources or other resources you find, be able to just sit down and look at what some solid recommendations are in areas. But the other thing I would say is don't let other people make decisions for your family.
Yeah.
So if you're in a
So good.
situation where people are pushing you to make technology decisions for your child that you don't think are in their best interest, do not
Mm.
let them make those decisions. Take ownership of that as a parent and be able to make wise decisions based, again, on where you think your child is at. And again, if you
Mhm.
start with small things, that's part of the reason why for us, step one is regulating screen time. You can read that chapter and fully implement that in your home within a week. And if you do
Mm.
that, you have already greatly reduced the amount of risks that your child will face on a daily basis. So that's a great first step. We try to make it easy. Then
Mm.
you can,
Mhm.
as you have time, you can jump into the following steps, begin to implement those concepts in your home. But know that the moment you've completed step one, you've made huge progress over where you were before. So that's something to
Mhm.
celebrate. That really, really is. The other thing I would tell
Absolutely.
parents is this is going to be easier if you're with other parents or other families that are
Mm.
following the same process.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you, get a book club together, go through the book, go through
Mm.
the digital parenting guidebook, talk through it, be able to kind of potentially at points maybe either lean on each other's shoulders or maybe cry on each other's shoulders in some moments if you need
Right.
to. But that's going to help you be able to implement this in your home. Don't feel like you've
Mm.
got to go out and do this on your own. If you know other parents that are having similar challenges, go through this together, because there is a feeling at times like you're kind of on an island and you're the only one doing this, and then you'll get pushback from other parents and it just almost seems overwhelming. So I would just
Yeah.
encourage you, again, get started. Don't feel like you have to solve it all at once, and get with other people that are see the world the same way you do, and go through the material together. And I think you'll be amazed, because you'll turn around a month
Mm.
or two down the road and be like, we've improved in a lot of these areas that were concerning me.
Yeah. Yeah. So on the other side, there's families who are already dealing with devastating
Yes.
effects of the digital content that their kids have consumed or
Yes.
been affected by. What advice do you have for those families? I think a lot of times we feel like it's too far gone. There's nothing we can
Yep.
do.
The first thing I would say to parents, because I hear that often, the first thing I would
Mm.
tell parents, as long as there are kids that you still are that are still at your home, they're still under your roof, you absolutely have the ability to influence them, and that's our
Mm.
calling in those
Right.
moments, to help them through those challenges that they're facing. It is never too late, and part of the reason I
Mm.
can say that is because I know I serve a God that is able in those moments to work miracles
Mm.
in their lives.
Yeah.
So with that being said, don't lose heart.
Mm.
There might be difficult conversations that need to be had. And the other thing I'll say here is when I've had parents that have come to me after some really, really damaging things have happened in their homes because of technology, this is where there may need to be professional help involved.
Right.
There are times when, I know we like to throw around the term addicted, for example. I mean, people are
Mm.
addicted to screen time, addicted to video games, addicted
Mm.
to social media. There are times when that is actually clinically true. There is a
Yeah.
true addiction. And
Mhm.
in those moments, you would benefit from being able to have professional help. Now, as I say this, we're in a moment right now in America where there is a huge shortage of mental health professionals. And so trying to get into
Mm.
some of these get into some of these practices is very difficult. But you can have a first conversation with your primary care doctor. They're becoming, in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, kind of the frontline help with some of these challenges. And so
Mm-hmm.
talk to them about what you're seeing. We also include in the book, there's something called the problematic media use measure, which was created separately. We didn't create it. It was created
Hmm.
by a group of researchers from several different universities. And while it's designed for younger children, it can be helpful for you to analyze even if your kids are older. And what you can do is you can sit down and answer these 25 questions, and then you can take that to that either mental health professional, primary care provider, and say, here's what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And they can begin to give you some guidance on what needs to happen. It might be something as simple as, you show that to them and they say, listen, I don't know that this is really an addiction. I think you just need to, you need to work on maybe reining things in over a period of time so that you can get to a point. Or maybe they need to go through more of what we would call like a media fast, a screen time fast. You go away as a family and you don't take devices.
Right.
But there are moments when it's like, no, there's serious side effects that happen when you try
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And that's where a mental health professional is going to be really helpful at helping you walk through that and trying to get your child to a healthy place.
Yeah, it's that third set of eyes into the discussion. So a neutral party that can really help if you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed, or it just becomes a constant battle that you just don't know how to win over anymore.
Right.
And yeah, great advice. So yes, there. I heard about when you were talking about a technology fast. I heard about a family that let their kids have their devices, and they didn't let them know. I mean, they used them, and then all their batteries went dead. And they said, "Well, where do we plug them in?" And they had nowhere to plug them in. So lack of
Yes.
electricity can also limit your technology use.
Yeah.
So
One of the other things I would just throw out there for parents to consider is signing your kids up for groups or activities where devices aren't allowed. So I'll give
yes.
you an example of that. My boys are a part of a trail life troop here in Cleveland, Tennessee,
Mm-hmm.
and we just had a camp out a couple weekends ago. And so you got to see, 30, 11 to 18-year-old boys just out running in a field, no phones, no devices for the whole weekend. And
Yeah.
it was great to see. But that's an event where they know when they come to meetings and when they go do these, campouts and other activities, phones aren't going to be there. And that's part of the
Mm-hmm.
reason that parents sign up for those kind of events.
Right.
So that's just something else to consider. Don't feel like you have to always put all of this on your shoulders. There might be great activities you could plug them into where they
Mm-hmm.
can actually learn to be without screens. And I'll throw another one in there too
Right.
on the other side, because one of the dangers parents always talk to me about this, and I'm worried that my kids are going to fall behind in technology if I try to make wise decisions here. But there's also great activities that can give your children some exposure. So one of my
Right.
sons also just signed up to be a part of an FTC robotics team here in Chattanooga. And so they're going to get to, go in and build a robot and code it and do all of that. And he really likes, coding and
Mm-hmm.
those things. And so that's a great opportunity to, under, adult guidance, to be able to have some
Right.
exposure to technology, but without just saying, here's a computer, you're on your own.
Right. Exactly. And using it in ways that usually they aren't connected
Right.
to any type of, internet. They're standalone computers. And I don't think kids, even understand what those are anymore. That was the
Exactly.
norm in my day.
You can
But
work without the internet.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. It doesn't talk to anybody else. um, and so, but just to understand that there's so many other uses for technology than just the social aspect, which is it's become the predominant way
Yes.
that we use technology now, and it never was that way. And it has destroyed our personal relationships too,
Right.
because we're opting for those things versus those in person. So I love when you suggest have a book club, um, meet with people in person, and and within your church or within your homeschool co-op, or just maybe you have a park day with other homeschool families, and you're like having a discussion about technology and
Yep.
they're experiencing the same things, or bring that discussion up if people aren't talking about it, because everybody's got that question and they're thinking about the same thing you are. And so if you don't know what else to talk about that.
Absolutely.
So Well, thank you so much, David. I would just love for you again to talk about digitalparenting.com, what parents can find there, and then also about your book and where they can find that.
Absolutely. So at digitalparenting.com, we have a lot of resources that exist alongside the printed resources or digital resources we have. So if you're interested in just getting an introduction into our recommendations and our approach, I recommend you find the Digital Parenting Guidebook. You can go to digitalparenting.com and click on the link to get the book, and it'll take you to Amazon, but you can also find the book pretty much anywhere that you buy books. So you can grab that book. That's going to be the foundation. That's going to cover what we call the 7 essential steps of digital parenting. And then we have resources online at our site, digitalparenting.com, that go along with each of those steps and also help give you just some advice on, again, not just how to be scared of technology, but also some good things you can plug your kids into that enable them to learn in a way that is going to be safe and is going to be something that is appropriate for them. And we also link with several of our partners that provide resources. We're talking about, things like that monitoring, those monitoring tools, or if you're looking at getting your child a phone, we're going to provide you links into some trusted companies that provide resources that you can take advantage of.
Awesome. Well, that's great. And I appreciate that all being out there because it's definitely a necessary tool. And I'm glad that you have answered that call and are providing families with those types of resources because they need a trustworthy place to go. There's just so much information, and to be able to know that this aligns with my values, this can actually encourage more than just regulated, coming down on my kids, and having really that discussion and wise discipleship, as you've talked over and over again. It truly is a discipleship issue with our children, and that's what we've been called to. And we don't safeguard them. We'd love to, but that's just not the way it works. And we've all been given free choice for a reason, and we have to help them to use that free choice in a God-honoring way. So I appreciate your work. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us today here on Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Just know that we have a new group on our private platform at spedhomeschool.com that is just for this show. So if you want to keep this conversation going, have additional questions and comments, we would be happy to continue that conversation there. So you can head over to spedhomeschool.com and look at groups. If you are at a navigator level, you can access that. If you're not, you'll have to change your membership. It's $5 a month, not too much. But that gets you access actually to all of our groups led by all of the various consultants that work with us. So that's a huge benefit. But next week, we will be talking with Marianne Sutherland from Homeschooling Dyslexia, and she's going to be talking with us about thinking beyond the book, creative strategies for language-based learning challenges, which I know a lot of you have interest in. So definitely you can put your questions ahead of time, again, in that same group, or join us live, or do both. We'd appreciate that. So yeah, but thanks again, David. Appreciate just all your time and the work that your team is doing. And I just pray blessings over you guys as you continue to develop resources, because I know you are just getting started, and it's pretty exciting that you are in this space, and just can't wait to see how this expands and grows for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for this wonderful conversation today.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us here on Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Take care, and God bless, and I will see you here next week. Bye, everybody.
This has been Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool, a nonprofit that empowers families to home educate diverse learners. To learn more, visit spedhomeschool.com